Welcome to another edition of the Routine Jumper Daily Podcast, a podcast where we discuss everything NBA basketball every day of the week. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into, but before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily NBA content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. With that all being said, let's get right into today's episode. And the premise of today's episode is very simple. My biggest surprise takeaways and questions coming out of the first week of the NBA season. Now, there's a bunch of different routes you could take for this, and I have a ton more questions than the ones we're just going to discuss in this episode. That'll be sprinkled out throughout the week from not only the games from last week, but as we see more games played throughout this week, it'll make it a lot easier for me to kind of formulate some of these questions and ideas as we go along. So these questions are going to be just simply focused on some of the things that just, I don't know, stood out to me the most of anything from the first week. And it doesn't always involve the biggest name teams, right? We've discussed the Cooper Flags and Philadelphia with VJ Edgecombe and what's going on with the Golden State Warriors. We've talked about those. But some of the other things around the league from some of the teams that people are not paying attention to as much in the early going are the things that I have the most interesting thoughts on. So here's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the Charlotte Hornets. 2-1 so far through 3 games. And the thing that stood out to me is the Charlotte Hornets look like a competent basketball team. And now, I know that's not saying they're a great basketball team. I don't necessarily know if that means they're a good basketball team. I'm not predicting them to make the postseason necessarily right now. But they just look like a basketball team that finally just knows how to actually play for a full 48 minutes where everything looks not just aesthetically pleasing, but like they know what they're doing. I know that sounds kind of weird given that they are professionals, but I think a lot of people could say that when you watch the Charlotte Hornets play the last couple of years, led by LaMelo Ball, they look like a very erratic basketball team where it seems like on a night-to-night basis, when you factor in the fact that they haven't really had real blue-chip talent over the last couple of years to rely on, they just seem like they don't know what they're doing on a night-to-night basis. And I think it's contributed to the reason why they've been so bad over the last couple of years. And I think you saw a glimpse of what they're capable of as a team with like real competent basketball players across the entire 8 to 10 man roster when they made those trade acquisitions for like Grant Williams and Seth Curry beforehand, right? I think it was literally earlier last season or the season prior. And you saw this like glimpse of hope where you're like, wait a minute. So if they just have a decent roster full of like NBA caliber players, right? Not your Nick Smith Juniors of the world, right? Who just seem like real, I don't even know what to really describe them as in this sense, right? But guys that just don't stick in the league, right? And just get guys that actually have a real place in the NBA. What can this team look like? And they were actually pretty decent. And so this year, you see, even with Brandon Miller going down with injury early on, you draft Colin Knippel, you bring in Colin Sexton, who's been big time so far through the first 3 games. LaMelo Ball is playing well. Ryan Kalkbrenner out of Creighton has been solid at the center position. That was going to be one of the biggest questions coming into this year after moving off of Mark Williams, letting Nick Richards go as well. What was the center situation going to look like? And Ryan Kalkbrenner so far throughout these 3 games looks relatively solid, especially on the rebounding tip as a guy that I think you can trust in the middle as a solid offensive and defensive rebounder. Now, as a rim protector, a little bit more questionable, but as somebody that you can feel like competent throwing out, again, that word is going to be very frequent throughout this subject. He's somebody that you know for 25 to 30 minutes a night, you can just trust him on the floor as a legitimate, guy at the 5. But here's what stood out to me, and this is the reason why they're so intriguing to me through 3 games. I'm going to go through all of these stats where the Charlotte Hornets rank in the top 5 in the NBA through 3 games. Now, again, I understand sample size is small, and I know that, one of these games was against the Nets. So, I mean, a little bit skewed. But here's the thing. The Charlotte Hornets are currently tied with the Denver Nuggets for the most points per game with 132. The Charlotte Hornets are also top 5 in assists per game with 31. The Denver Nuggets and Utah Jazz both are tied for first with 31.5. Also, the Charlotte Hornets are number 4 in three-pointers made with 48. The Golden State Warriors lead with 51. The Charlotte Hornets are second in the NBA, or tied for second in the NBA, with the Sacramento Kings for the second highest three-point percentage, behind only the Philadelphia 76ers. The Hornets are hitting 41.4% of their threes. Philly's hitting 43. Shout out VJ Edgecomb, because boy, oh boy, has he been solid. Him and Tyrese Maxey have been able to knock down those from big time. Charlotte Hornets have the third highest offensive rating in the NBA, behind only the LA Clippers and the Denver Nuggets. But let's go into some of the other nuanced stats where they're still sticking really high up in there. Catch and shoot points per game, 47. The next closest, Golden State with 42. The Charlotte Hornets, off of elbow jumpers, 8 points per game, top 5 in the NBA, just behind the Houston Rockets. Mind you, the Houston Rockets have one of the best elbow jumper shooters in the NBA in Kevin Durant at their starting 2/3. Last but not least, the Charlotte Hornets are number 5 in potential assists. I know that sounds silly, potential assists, but that's a focus on ball movement. This is one of those teams that I think is playing so well in terms of how they've been operating in pace, and they've played so much faster. And I think it's important that they're moving the ball around so much more, because it's allowing for the offense to be more free flowing. This team, potential assist is such an interesting stat for a team like this, because it's a representation of how much the ball really is moving around in comparison to years past, with LaMelo Ball usually being this heliocentric-esque player. You'll see the stats for LaMelo and you'll say, he's averaging 8-9 assists per game. He has to be an elite level ball mover, and he's an elite level passer as far as decision making with the ball from a pass to points ratio. But in terms of being able to initiate efficient offense, he's not a real point guard from the perspective of being able to get guys in good offense, get the ball banging around constantly, and allowing for open opportunities to kind of present themselves. Instead, it's a lot of LaMelo Ball isolation, self-shot creation, and then kind of in the span of, the last couple of seconds of a shot clock, or being able to hit guys on hit-ahead passes in transition. Those are the kind of ways that LaMelo Ball tends to accumulate his assists. But this Hornets team is starting to actually play a lot more together. And, there was a whole bunch of news out of camp that was talking about, Colin Sexton as a vocal leader in the locker room for the Hornets coming into his first season with the team. And I think that's huge for him. He's coming from a Utah Jazz team that was blatantly taking over the last 2 years. And Colin Sexton is a player who I think, despite, being an undersized guard, he was a guy who got a bad rap with the Cleveland Cavaliers, personally. I feel like his lack of a fit next to Darius Garland erased how effective of a scorer he was coming out of Alabama, drafted, top 10 in the NBA, as a guy that was really productive in his first couple of seasons with the Cavs. Now, was it pretty? No. But this was a guy who was a really high-level scorer for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and a guy who, after being moved from Cleveland, kind of faded into the ether, despite being a guy that really should be considered as, a six-man of the year caliber talent on a competent team like the Hornets look like right now. And it's good to see them playing this kind of basketball, because they're starting to kind of put it together, right? LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Colin Knippel, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Miles Bridges, Colin Sexton, Trey Mann. I like what they have going as far as the team looking like a real basketball team. Again, this team for the last 2 to 3 years has kind of just trotted out whatever talent is just readily available at the time, and not necessarily putting out a product that represents what the future is supposed to look like. For the last 3 to 4 years, you can make the argument that outside of drafting Brandon Miller last year, the Charlotte Hornets have not truly had a real blue chip prospect on their team other than Miller and LaMelo Ball. There has not been a true staple of the franchise. Oh, yeah, this guy's totally going to stick for the foreseeable future on this roster aside from those two guys. And Brandon Miller was a rookie last year. I think that goes to show that the Hornets have to do things a little bit differently. And I think the pace they're playing with right now, the up tempo, I think they understand that they're not going to be like an elite level defensive team. The personnel doesn't scream for that. But hitting your 3 pointers at a high rate, playing fast, being up and down the floor, adopting the Indiana Pacers with Tyrese Halliburton play style, but with a guy who's just as dynamic on ball in LaMelo Ball at the point guard position, it puts them in a really interesting spot. Now, again, I don't want to overreach when it comes to the Charlotte Hornets. We have to remember the Charlotte Hornets. They played the Brooklyn Nets as one of their first games of the season, and if I'm not mistaken, the Hornets also played the Wizards most recently as well. Yes, beat the Wizards 139 to 113. So, of their first 3 games, the only team that looked even relatively viable were the 76ers, who we still have questions about. They lost that game 121 to 125, and there was another really strong game from Tyrese Maxey. Quentin Grimes went completely off. Joel Embiid had 20 points in 20 minutes, and they still only lost by 4 points in this game. Other than that, you play the Nets and the Wizards. It surely is going to skew things a little bit. So we'll see how their next couple games go with them playing the Miami Heat, who we'll talk about a little bit later on in the podcast, the Orlando Magic, as well as the Minnesota Timberwolves in their next 3 games this upcoming week. So there'll be some real opportunity to see if some of these early stints are going to stick. But I am happy to say that this Charlotte Hornets team, they look different. I don't know if they are different, but they look different. And I think that's a big step in the right direction for a Hornets franchise that is kind of just been swimming in the middle of the pond with nowhere really to go. And I think that this season, whether they make the playoffs or not, the goal of this season is to figure out who the mainstays are. It feels like LaMelo is still a mainstay. It feels like everything around the organization indicates they still believe in him as the franchise point guard. Brandon Miller, when healthy, I feel like he is going to be a fringe all-star. I talked about this on a previous podcast episode. I think this is a guy that, when healthy, he's going to be a real dude in this league. And I hate that he's already dealing with a little bit of an issue injury-wise, but I think when he's on the floor, he's just going to be a really effective two-guard for them. Carl Knipple, I like him as just a floor spacer, another guy that you can ask to handle the ball at a high level, good decision maker, competitive on defense. And like I said, I think Ryan Kalkbrenner is going to be a sneaky steal for them as a guy who out of Creighton has actually been really solid for them in the early going of this season. You guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about the Hornets in the early portion of the year. Obviously, 3-game sample size. So we're dealing with very ballooned numbers given the fact that we haven't seen these teams over even a double-digit sample size to really make sense of it all. But through 3 games, even if you want to say the sample is a little skewed, I think if you turn on the tape, this team is just playing the game of basketball a lot differently than they have the last 2 to 3 years, and that's a step in the right direction for a franchise that desperately needs to find their footing. Next up, let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. This team, they just know how to draft. It feels like they just year after year after year just keep finding a way to find talent, whether it's in the NBA draft, on the undrafted market. Right, let's think about Jalen Wells. Desmond Bane was taken in the late first round. Another player who comes to mind is, I don't want to disrespect anybody by forgetting any of the key names, but Desmond Bane is one that obviously comes to mind. Jalen Wells comes to mind. Scottie Pippen Jr. That's the other name that I didn't want to let slip. He came into the year injured. That's why he almost kind of like flew past. But that's another one. They just had this knack. Vince Williams, another really solid one at the power forward slash center position. They just have this really good knack for finding these diamond in the rough talents at premium prices. And Cedric Coward out of Washington State was one of the biggest enigmas of the NBA draft because 6'5", 206 pounds, rangy wing, has real upside as a defender, knockdown three-point shooter, but he only played like 3 games for Washington State before missing the rest of the year due to injury. And prior to that, he had played on a lesser division level and absolutely killed, but you had to ask yourself whether or not the quality of competition skewed what his productivity was, or was he just that dang good? Well, through 3 games, Cedric Coward, if I'm not mistaken, is their either second or third leading scorer for the Memphis Grizzlies right now. And he is coming off a great performance against the Indiana Pacers, where they won 128-103, where he had 27 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal, and was 6 for 6 from beyond the arc. Cedric Coward has scored in double figures in all 3 games. He's gotten to the free throw line 4 times in all 3 games and is 11 of 12 from the free throw line. He's shooting 70% from the field through 3 games on pretty decent shooting splits. 5 of 5 in the first game against New Orleans, 5 of 9 against Miami in that loss, and then 9 of 13 in the win over Indiana. Cedric Coward was essentially drafted to be a pseudo Desmond Bane replacement to a certain extent. He was actually drafted with the pick acquired from the Orlando Magic in the Desmond Bane trade. And Cedric Coward, for what he is archetype-wise, he has came in and did exactly what he needs to do. I'm glad that outside of the very first game against New Orleans, he has come in and decided he is going to chuck threes. 5 3-point attempts in the Miami game, 6 attempts in that game against Indiana. And I think he should continue on that path of being a 5 to 7 3-point attempt per night kind of guy on the perimeter. He has the positional size defensively to be a high upside defender for that team. I think he's going to be a guy that fits really well next to Ja Morant because he runs in transition. He's a big-time athlete around the rim. He's a guy that I think that as a 3-point shooter can be a consistent 37 to 40% knockdown shooter. And he's somebody that I feel like also you can trust to have a little bit of on-ball chops in a second unit next to Scottie Pippen Jr. when he comes back healthy, next to Jalen Wells. I think he can be a really, really solid player for this Memphis Grizzlies team. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they've tried their best to feature him so much in the early portions. And I'm not talking about them trying to like run plays for him, but Cedric Coward is playing. Let me double check this just to make sure. Yes, Cedric Coward is playing the 6th most minutes of any player for the Memphis Grizzlies right now. Basically, their pseudo 6th man on the roster coming off the bench. And he's a guy who I think just fits really well with what they're trying to do. And I think he's a guy that if we're going to be realistic, even when somebody like Scottie Pippen Jr. comes back, he's a guy who I think at some point, depending on how big of a lineup they want to play, I think there's even a point where Cedric Coward could overtake Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in that starting lineup. And you look at the roster construction of this Memphis Grizzlies team. You got Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. at the top. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, you bring in as part of that Desmond Bane trade to get a knockdown 3-point shooter, somebody that has positional defensive size, and you add that on the wing. Hopefully he has a bounce back 3-point shooting season because, at least for the Memphis Grizzlies' sake, because as far as we're concerned, for the Orlando Magic, he was brought in to do one thing and one thing only, which was to knock down the 3 ball, and he was not efficient from beyond the arc last season. This season, he is still struggling below 30% from beyond the arc on 6 attempts per game. That's gonna be the thing that makes the question of bumping someone like Cedric Coward to that starting lineup really, really enticing. But they also have Jalen Wells, who I think is a really solid player that fits in as a guy who just does the dirty work things and is just a very good fit next to Ja as another ball handler. Jock Landale, I think, is really solid. Santi Aldama is a really good player at the power forward position and someone that I think is also going to be trusted in closing lineups depending on the scenario. But Cedric Coward is just another one of these Memphis Grizzlies homegrown products that I think is going to be. I think that Cedric Coward is going to be a NBA all rookie team player. Whether it's first team or second team is kind of debatable. If you had to do it through the first week, I think Cedric Howard debatably could be in that first team. I mean, Cedric could be right up there with Cooper Flag. I think is deserving. Um, Obviously VJ Edgecombe is deserving. Um, Dylan Harper, of course. I don't even want to sleep on him. I felt like I missed him a lot in the last podcast talking about the rookies. So those are three guys that feel like general locks. But beyond that, those other two spots can be kind of up for grabs. And I think Cedric Howard could arguably be one of those guys already. Shout out to the Memphis Grizzlies for just once again being able to find another real talent. They took a swing on a guy who all the scouting reports say the on paper value of Cedric Howard says that he's a player that's going to be a real question mark because you have to really evaluate the sample size he had, which was a very minimal one, to what the eye test tells you. Because if you cut the film on, if you watch what he was able to do in college, if you watch how he was able to operate as an offensive player on the wing, the eye test tells you this is an NBA made player day one with upside to have like real all-star potential at the wing spot. The paper tells you he might be a work in progress and we have to see what he can do playing against next level athletes. Well, so far, he's been able to translate properly as a 3-and-D wing with the upside of being a knockdown three-point shooter out the gate, and this Memphis Grizzlies team can really use that. And so far, it's really benefited them. And to kind of translate that to some of the stats, I want to go back to that list I was using for the Charlotte Hornets because the Memphis Grizzlies, they apply very similarly to some of the stuff they've been able to do productive-wise. And the thing that stood out to me the most, I want to find it again, because I think it's just kind of important, is the Memphis Grizzlies are one of the better teams in terms of pace of play. There we go. The Memphis Grizzlies are fourth in the NBA in pace behind the Washington Wizards, the Toronto Raptors, and the Miami Heat. Again, we're going to talk about the Miami Heat a little bit later because they're doing some interesting things right now. But the Memphis Grizzlies are playing fast basketball. They're playing up-tempo basketball. I think they understand that they have real athletes across the board. And Ja Morant, look, all the off-the-court stuff has made people really forget how dope of a point guard Ja Morant is. Ja Morant, when healthy, when right, is a top 5, no lower than top 8 point guard in the NBA. And with the right talent around him, this Memphis Grizzlies team has a real chance to make the postseason and be a dangerous team to see in the first round because of somebody like Ja Morant who shows up in big moments alongside dudes like Jaren Jackson Jr. who's developed more of an offensive game with Ja Morant off the floor, and with guys like Jalen Wells who out the gate show that they could be a productive rookie and hopefully are able to build onto that. Watch out for the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm not saying that they're going to be this juggernaut team. I'm not even saying they're going to beat your favorite team in the postseason first round. But I'm saying that this is a Memphis Grizzlies team that if everything continues in the right trending direction, especially with Ja Morant just playing good basketball again, this team is one of them ones that in the Western Conference, you're going to hate to see in the first round because it's going to be knockdown, drag out, and it's going to be a series that you wish didn't go too far because if you get to a game 6, you get to a game 7 against this Grizzlies team, playing at this pace, playing with Ja Morant, looking like that all-star caliber point guard that we know he's capable of being again. You could be facing elimination, buddy, because even though everything says that this team is kind of a fringe playoff team at best in this version of Western Conference, that guy at the top paired with guys like Cedric Coward and Triple J should make you a little bit fearful in a winner go home scenario. So even in a play-in tournament game, like, what's it called? 7, 8, 9, 10. Elimination game with Ja Morant, Triple J, Cedric Coward, Jalen Wells. Depending on who they see, I would lean Grizzlies. Even if the Grizzlies come in as underdogs, I would actually end up leaning Grizzlies just because of that guy. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below. Did I miss somebody? I think Cedric Coward, when you factor in that he was drafted, right around the bottom portion of the lottery, and he's been this productive through the beginning, if he can keep this up and be this double-digit scorer, knockdown three-point shooter for the Memphis Grizzlies, I think he will be considered the steal of the 2025 NBA draft. You have to factor in where he was drafted as well. Now, I think some people would say, depending on if VJ Edgecombe outplays Cooper Flagg this year, you got the best player in the draft, rookie-wise, at the third pick. Maybe you could say that that's a steal, but I think in terms of actual positional value, talk about in the draft, to get Cedric Coward just outside of the lottery and he be this productive, if he can keep this consistent throughout the entire year, I think Cedric Coward might just end up being the steal of the 2025 draft. But you guys let me know who your early name is that you're watching as a potential steal from this draft class. Somebody that you could put on my radar for me to keep tabs on, because I'm really interested in this rookie class, but I'm trying to look beyond just that top 5, right? I know Ace Bailey's been sick through the first few games of the season, so he's been on a minutes restriction. VJ's been amazing. Cooper's been amazing. Dylan Harper's been very solid. Colin Knippel's been pretty good with Charlotte as well. But I want to see what some of those other guys in the mid-first round, late first round, even early second are able to do. So get me hip. If I'm missing out on somebody, I want to know so I can lock in on them. Next up, let's talk about the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics are a weird basketball team. That opening game at home against the Philadelphia 76ers where VJ Edgecombe basically has his coming out party. Everybody corrected me in the comment section. Third best rookie debut in NBA history. Look, it's the best NBA rookie debut in this century, okay? Like, that's what I meant, right? So, like, and as far as the 2000s and the 2000s all the way dating back to, 19 whatevers, VJ Edgecombe's performance was the best. Neither here nor there. That first game of the season was so odd because it was like they were in control for a decent amount of time in that game through the first 2.5 quarters, and it felt like things just kind of discombobulated themselves. They really lost themselves. The Boston Celtics are 0-3 through 3 games, with their most recent loss coming to the Detroit Pistons. And Jaylen Brown had himself a real efficient 41 points. Peyton Pritchard, 21-10. But here's the thing, and we'll get into this a little bit deeper in a second, but the 21-10 wasn't that Peyton Pritchard had 10 assists. He had 10 rebounds. Peyton Pritchard, smallest guard in your starting line, smallest player in your starting lineup, maybe even started smallest player on your roster, led the team with 10 rebounds. Next closest was Neemias Queta and Jaylen Brown, both had 6 apiece. The Detroit Pistons had 3 players score 20 or more points. Asor Thompson had 21-12. Jalen Duren had 24-18. Cade Cunningham, 25 points, 8 assists. Solid night. They also got 18 points and 8 rebounds from Tobias Harris. This Pistons team absolutely dog-walked the Boston Celtics on the boards. So I did some digging. Guess what? The Boston Celtics are the 5th worst rebounding team in the league, behind the Brooklyn Nets, the Phoenix Suns, the Sacramento Kings, who, mind you, have been without Domantas Sabonis and Domantas Sabonis has missed time. I guess you could say, and the Portland Trailblazers. Bottom 5 in rebounding. And single-handedly the second worst team in the East in rebounding. And that's going to kill them. I think a lot of people knew coming into this season that them starting Neemias Queta, and no disrespect to Neemias Queta, but I mean, he was drafted out of Utah State, or he went undrafted out of Utah State, if I'm not mistaken. But like, this is somebody who kind of like is lucky to be like a second or third center on a real rotation. I mean, literally last year, that's basically what he was. And now here he is being elevated to the starting center position for the Boston Celtics. We knew that it was going to be a hard time without JT. We knew it was going to be a hard time when you go through this transitional period where you move off of Drew Holiday, you move off of Kristaps Porzingis, you lose Al Horford in the offseason to the Golden State Warriors as well. I mean, you lost essentially 4 of your premium pieces for that championship team in one offseason, and you don't necessarily replace it with equal value of any kind. Anthony Simons, I think, is a high value player at the point guard position, but he's definitely no comparable piece in relation to someone like Drew Holiday, even, right, who he was traded for. Neemias Queta is nowhere in the stratosphere of what Kristaps Porzingis was for the Boston Celtics, even with the fact that it felt like Kristaps Porzingis barely even played for the Boston Celtics in his tenure with them. Al Horford, obviously there's no true replacement for him as well, because it's not just his rim protection or his three-point shooting. It's also what he was able to bring as just a locker room presence for that team. And of course, JT, like there's no direct bump in the lineup that allows you to make up for the kind of production you get from Jason Tatum, who's an All-NBA first-team player when healthy and an MVP candidate when healthy, right? So we knew that this was going to be a rough year for the Boston Celtics. But the question we have to ask ourselves, and I'm sure Boston Celtics fans have mixed reviews on this, but I just watched Cam Boozer, have a 20-20 game against Nate Ahmed, another top 5 freshman in the class of 2026 rookie class for potential, draft picks next year. I just watched him drop like 24 and 22. Granted, in an exhibition game nonetheless, but 24 and 22 in a matchup between 2 of the top 5 draft picks in this upcoming rookie class, in this upcoming draft class. If I'm Boston, and this is a really, really good class at the top, by the way, because you got Cam, you got AJ DeBonsa, you got Nate Ahmed, you've got Darren Peterson, right, who can be a really good fill-in when you talk about point guard, right? Obviously, they have Peyton Pritchard, and I know Celtics fans are big on Peyton Pritchard, but still need some legitimate point guard depth there, and Darren can also play as a 2 guard. He's big enough to play the 3 for you. That's neither here nor there. This is not an NBA draft video. Although we will be doing NBA draft content on the YouTube page, so definitely check out that stuff. I'll be doing reaction videos to different performances here and there. Might even do a video on that Cam Boozer performance. But you have to ask yourself, with this kind of draft class, with the valid excuse of not having Jason Tatum on the roster, of seeing an entire roster overhaul in the span of a couple of months after last postseason, you have the green light to basically hit like the mini reset, like take a little detour for a second from being the championship caliber team you've been in years past, and take this little 1-year hiccup and say, you know what, we can afford, because the Boston Celtics have their draft pick this year, we can afford to be bad for 1 year, land in the top 5 in a very stacked draft class that is still very talented, even when you get past the first 2 to 3 guys. Even if you end up being 4th or 5th or even 6th, there's a very solid group of guys at the top of this draft class from a talent perspective. You add that to getting Jason Tatum back. You get Jalon Brown back another year. You still have Derek White under contract. You still have Peyton Pritchard under contract. And you opened up $110 million in potential long-term cap space by letting go of Kristaps Porzingis and moving Kristaps Porzingis and moving Drew Holiday and letting Al Horford walk. So you now have the financial flexibility to maybe go get some real depth to fill out the roster next season, next offseason. You get Jason Tatum back. You get the main core guys from that championship team that are still left in Jalon Brown, Derek White, and Peyton Pritchard still on the roster and under contract moving forward. And you build from there with a top 5, top 7 pick in the NBA draft. And now you're kind of building back towards where you just were at, which was one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference all over again. So should the Boston Celtics really consider going into a tank? Now, I know 3 games straight of losing is not enough to tell you, oh man, this team is terrible. They need to just go ahead and throw the whole thing in the trash. But I do think it's a representation of what is worth considering. This is a team that's issue at the center position is going to hurt them a lot during this season. If they got killed on the glass by the Detroit Pistons, they're going to be a team that's going to struggle a lot during this season when you look at some of the best bigs in the NBA residing in the Eastern Conference, or a good handful of the best rebounding bigs being in the Eastern Conference. The Boston Celtics struggling on the boards is going to hurt them all year. And if it's in their best interest, it might not be the right thing to try to upgrade the center position right now, given that they have such a financially beneficial runway moving forward by not signing anybody long-term or bringing in any negative contracts. So you look at the structure, and maybe I'll look this up while I'm talking, but maybe it's even one of those things where when you look at what this team should want for themselves moving forward, is this a team that really, realistically, is this a team realistically that has championship aspirations this year with the roster they have? Because this team on paper doesn't look talented enough to make a run in the postseason. I don't even know if this team is talented enough to make a run in the postseason if they added Jason Tatum to this team. Truthfully, because of how bad they are in the front court, specifically that center position. But look at this though. Going into next summer, you still have Jason Tatum, Jalon Brown, Derek White, and Peyton Pritchard under contract. Other than that, you've got $10 million in Sam Hauser. You have $2 million for Hugo Gonzalez and $2 million or $2.9 million for Hugo Gonzalez, $2.8 million for Luka Garza. And then you have team options on Baylor Shireman, Josh Minot, Neemias Queta, and Jordan Walsh. So essentially, going into next season, you have 6 guys who are officially, stamp it, going into the year under contract for the Boston Celtics. Tank this year, get a top 5 to top 10 pick in the NBA draft, add that to this roster as a cost-effective, high-leverage talent, and then fill your roster out with the available cap space you would have open to yourselves. And all of a sudden, you're in this crazy position to jump right back in the mix for where you just were 2 years ago as a championship caliber team. I think the Boston Celtics have to at least consider it. I think you have to consider it. Do you have to be as blatant as the Utah Jazz were last year? No. No, you don't. But should you be positioning yourself in ways that the Boston Celtics have specialized in years past, of being able to land top flight draft picks when they were in the lottery? I mean, Jason Tatum and Jalon Brown are perfect examples of that, right? Both taken number 3 overall. And look how they both turned out. Maybe you do it again. Maybe you do it again and you get a Cameron Boozer who you can start at power forward or small ball center as a big time rebounder. Maybe you do it again and you bring in um somebody like Darren Peterson at the point guard position who could be a good fill-in as another big wing guard next to Peyton Pritchard, next to Jaylen Brown in that starting lineup, with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And now you have these rangy wings, all that can be super athletic on the defensive end. And then you get, a defensive-oriented point guard. Or shoot, move Derek White to the point guard position. Now you have Darren Peterson at the 1, Derek White at the 2, Jaylen Brown at the 3, Jason Tatum at the 4, and then you fill in the center position. You bring Peyton Pritchard off the bench again. And now you got this rangy wing lineup where everybody in the starting 5, at least that main 1 through 4, can all defend at a high level on the perimeter, can defend 1 through 3, 1 through 4. And Darren Peterson's not necessarily a knockdown three-point shooter, nor is Jaylen Brown, but you would have 4 guys who could all shoot the 3 ball at a pretty decent clip as well. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying it's a great idea. I'm not saying it's a perfect idea. I don't even know if Celtics fans know what the idea of tanking should feel or look like, given what the last handful of years have been with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the roster. You guys haven't necessarily needed to walk at this crossroads before. So I don't know what you guys would want to do. Let me know in the comment section down below. I think it's actually not a terrible idea. And I think that a lot of Celtics fans, when you look at the NBA draft big board right now, and you look at some of the talent that's sitting at the top, yeah, once you get past the top 4 or 5, there's always going to be a drop-off. But landing a top 10 pick in this draft class, especially if the Celtics can get lucky enough to be like the Atlanta Hawks this 2 years ago when they landed the Atlanta Hawks when they landed Zachary Ricochet 2 years ago, or shoot, even the Dallas Mavericks who landed Cooper Flag. If the Boston Celtics are able to pull off something similar to that and get a Cameron Boozer and add that to the front court lineup, I mean, pair that with them being able to have that kind of free available payroll that they can bolster up their depth next offseason, and this team is right back where they're supposed to be at. That's just my thoughts on it. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below. Last but not least, ending on another Eastern Conference team. And for those who don't know, I live on the East Coast, so I am a little bit more favorable to showing them love. Also, I believe that the national media tends to drive a lot of narratives for the West Coast teams. Your Golden State Warriors, Los Angeles Lakers, Clippers, Phoenix. They tend to skew very much West Coast. So I, as a responsible NBA evaluator / analyst online, think that the Eastern Conference deserves a little bit more love. And I think in a year like this one, where a lot of people are writing off the Eastern Conference because of some of the talent that's coming in injured, I want to still show love to what's going on in the Eastern Conference because I think there's some good basketball going out there. That's just my personal opinion. And the Miami Heat are playing themselves some good basketball. They're playing themselves some good basketball. Norman Powell has them boys hooping. He's already coming in and asserted himself as the top scorer for this team, averaging 21.5 points per game. They've got what's this? 7 guys averaging double figures. I want to take this time to point out that this is a real bounce back start for Jaime Jaquez, who a lot of people were really worried about last year, having a little bit of a drop off after having a really strong rookie season. Jaime Jaquez, 15.7 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, and a guy who is just been competitive on the defensive end, been a really good ball mover, scorer. Him and Simone Fontecchio off the bench. And Simone Fontecchio, he's a guy who was solid with the Detroit Pistons as well. And I think Detroit's going to miss him a little bit. But Jaime Jaquez and Simone Fontecchio off the bench are combined for 29.4 points off that Miami Heat bench. They have been solid for this team through the first 3 games. Norman Powell is averaging 24 points. He was averaging 21.5 before this most recent game. Had to adjust my notes there. Also, Davion Mitchell. I know he's only averaging 9 points, but 8.3 assists. And something that stood out to me too, and I want to make sure it's still sticking, Davion Mitchell is shooting 37.5% from beyond the arc. I know it's not on crazy volume, but I like that he's shooting the three ball at a pretty decent clip. Him and Norman Powell are two of the better shooters on this team so far. And Simone Fontecchio also 50% from beyond the arc on 5 attempts per game. They've got a couple of guys that are really getting that shot up there. Nikola Jovic also 40% from beyond the arc on 4 attempts per game. Let me show you some of the team stats that I thought were really important to what they've been doing so far in the beginning part of the season. Miami Heat, number 5 in points per game with 127.3. Rebounds per game, tied with the San Antonio Spurs, 51.3. Miami also, let me get to the part that I thought was really, really important. If I'm not mistaken, here we go. Net rating of 12. Next closest, or the 12 is second in the NBA behind the San Antonio Spurs. They're at 17.4. That net rating is really built off of the fact that they've been blowing folks out with the fact that Victor Wembanyama just looks like an absolute menace. So, top 5 in net rating, top 5 in defensive rating behind the New York Knicks, the San Antonio Spurs, and at number 1 in defensive rating, doubles. This is not their segment, so I'm not gonna go too crazy about it. But I'm just saying the Miami Heat are number 4 in defensive rating behind the New York Knicks, who have real strong defensive personnel on the team with guys like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby on that roster. San Antonio Spurs, who are really effective as a defensive unit, and they lean on Victor Wembanyama as a rim protector. And then doubles, who I don't know what's making them so crazy as a defensive team, but I'm also not mad at it. So, hey, do what you want. But here's what I also want to touch on. Miami Heat, 3rd in fast break points with 24 per game behind the Toronto Raptors and the San Antonio Spurs. Miami Heat, also behind the Toronto Raptors and San Antonio Spurs in points in the paint with 63 per game. The San Antonio Spurs, mind you, we just saw Victor Wembanyama go off, dominating in the paint. They have 66. Toronto, 70. That team can't shoot threes like that, so they are kind of having to kill folks from the paint. The Miami Heat are playing up and down basketball. The Miami Heat are 3rd in points per game in shot, catch and shoot opportunities behind the Charlotte Hornets and Golden State Warriors. That's insane. The Miami Heat are number 1 in pace of play by a decent margin at 112.3, with the next closest being the Toronto Raptors at 108.8. This team is doing it the nitty-gritty Miami way. The only difference is that they're hitting the 3 ball. But they're relying on defense and athleticism. We are going to punish you on the glass. We are going to rebound at a high level. We are going to defend at a high level. Davion Mitchell is looking like one of the best point of attack defenders in the league right now, hounding guys in the backcourt. The positional versatility that they have with guys like Jaime Jaquez, Nikola Jovic, Simone Fontecchio, Andrew Wiggins, gives them real range defensively to play crazy passing lanes. And if I'm not mistaken, I want to double check this because I know they're not top 5 in this stat, but I do think they're up there in... Where are they? Okay, so they're not as high as I thought they were in deflections. But you would think they are with the kind of range they have in terms of some of the guys they have on the team. But neither here nor there, because that's not necessarily important. But this Miami team is just doing it. They're just doing it the way that I feel like the underrated versions of the Miami squads have always done it. You look back at past versions of Miami where, like, they just didn't have like this glaring superstar player. And I think Bam Adebayo is still an all-star in this league. Don't get me wrong. Still a walking defensive player of the year caliber guy on a night-to-night basis. But I remember a time when like Josh Richardson had to average like 18 plus points per game for this team. I remember times when this team had to rely just on being a gritty, win in the clutch, win with physicality basketball team. That's kind of what the whole premise of what the Jimmy Butler era of the Miami Heat was built on, to be honest, as well, right? And it seems like they've just kind of gotten back to it. Bam developed as an on-ball player last year offensively, and I think that's really helped his game. But you just don't see a takeover guy in Bam Adebayo. And so he needs somebody on that perimeter really to lead that charge. And that guy so far has been Norman Powell. And the question you have to ask yourself now is, like, with Norman being as good as he is, Jaime Jaquez and Simone Fontecchio stepping up as the way they are coming off that bench, Davion Mitchell is solid at the point of attack for defense. Like, is Tyler Hero's redundancy with Norman Powell something that actually makes him more expendable? As we discussed on the very first episode of this podcast, Tyler Hero is coming into this year both injured, aka unavailable, and he's a guy who's in a bit of a conundrum right now because he is signed through the rest of the season. I believe he's signed through next season as well, but he's up for contract extension negotiations. And Norman Powell is, if I'm not mistaken, under contract himself at a pretty favorable number, might I add, that makes it where if they're redundant, what portion of you holds on to Tyler Hero when you could potentially use him as an expiring contract trade chip moving forward? Excuse me. Norman Powell actually is going to become an unrestricted free agent this upcoming summer, which can either be a net positive or a net negative for the Miami Heat. The net positive is you might be able to get him on a more favorable deal than the $20.4 million you're owing him right now. The net negative of it is that you might end up watching him walk away in free agency. I think all of that says that I don't necessarily know if Tyler Hero is quote unquote expendable just yet. But if Norman Powell plays as well as he is, if this Miami Heat team looks good offensively the way they have, with having the kind of positional versatility they have, playing up and down basketball, moving the ball around, killing in transition, not really having any real weaknesses on the defensive end, maybe outside of Norman Powell, who is not an elite defender by any means, but I think is a much better defensive player than Tyler Hero at the shooting guard position. Do the Miami Heat take the opportunity to maybe move Tyler Hero while he's at an interesting crossroads and also avoid re-upping on a player at a position that has become quite questionable over the last couple of years? And more importantly, this last offseason was so indicative of that, right? Like, Utah basically traded Colin Sexton for a bag of chips. He has been really effective for the Charlotte Hornets so far through 3 games. But as the score-first point guard, shooting guard, his value wasn't that high, despite the fact that he's such an effective player. Quentin Grimes just snapped against the Charlotte Hornets and was a really solid player for the Philadelphia 76ers last year. Yet, he's on a qualifying offer right now because he has an upside as a defensive player, but again, he fits an archetype that is still this score-first oriented 2-guard. Cam Thomas is the poster child for what happened this past offseason, having to sign the qualifying offer for a Brooklyn Nets team who really don't got anybody else to give the money to, yet they didn't even feel comfortable signing him to a long-term deal. So the precedent is set that, like, Tyler Hero is kind of in a tough spot. Now, The other side of it is that he has a good representation as far as the positive side of that as well, in somebody like Tyrese Maxey, who, fellow Kentucky guard, made the All-Star team, being a score first point guard, a score first chuck 'em up point guard. I don't think Tyler Hero is better than Tyrese Maxey. There's a lot of parts of me that don't think Tyrese Maxey is anywhere close to Tyler Hero, or excuse me, reverse that. I don't think Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, goodness gracious, this podcast is derailing. I don't think that Tyler Hero and Tyrese Maxey are in the same tier, regardless of whatever you would archetype them as. I think Tyrese Maxey is that much better, and I think the gap is that much wider. All that to say, now that I've regathered myself, Tyler Hero is somebody that I think might really end up facing the trade block. I would not be surprised if the Miami Heat were taking phone calls for Tyler Hero as a potential trade chip to add more depth, and more importantly, if not depth, to add more draft capital, because this team really lacks in that department due to some of the moves they've made in the past, where Miami is in a really weird spot in terms of where they've been able to draft and what they've been able to do in the draft as far as the kind of treasure trove they do, or in this case don't have. Tyler Hero, coming off an All-Star year, still has another year or two on his contract before another team would have to pay him. Maybe you move off of him before things get too lucrative, or before you get in a situation similar to the Jonathan Kuminga dilemma, where you almost kind of have to sign him in order to later make a different move in a different, place and time where it's not as advantageous as moving him right now. But Miami's good, man. Miami's really good. They play fast. They defend all 94 feet. They are hard-nosed. They've got a go-to scorer in Norman Powell, who is taking what he did last year with the LA Clippers and just continuing to ride that high horse. Bam Adebayo is looking really good. He's averaging a double-double right now. That bench has been really productive. Miami, another team kind of similar to that Memphis Grizzlies team I was talking about earlier on in the pod. Like, if they make the playoffs, like, you do not want to see this team in the first round. I'm not saying you're going to lose. If you're the New York Knicks, or if you're the Cleveland Cavaliers, actually, you can make the argument that the Cleveland Cavaliers actually might lose, because the Cleveland Cavaliers, their biggest issue is they struggle with physicality. They admitted that after the very first game against the New York Knicks, that they struggled with the physicality of the Knicks on the interior. And here we are with the Miami Heat as one of the best scoring teams in the paint so far this year. So maybe if the Heat run into a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, maybe that series is a little different than what it just seems like it should be on paper, right? If they face a team like crosstown rival, the Orlando Magic, in the first round, like, that series could go the distance. I'm just saying that, again, small sample size. My thoughts on this will build up as we go throughout the season, but Miami is this team that I'm keeping a real close, like, magnifying glass on. I'm not watching them day to day, but they're a team that I'm going to keep a real good, like, radar on, because they're a squad that I feel like if they're in the mix for that top 8 in the Eastern Conference when the season is over, they're a team that a lot of people are going to shake their head and be like, dang, this is not going to be the kind of first round we were hoping for, where we can kind of scoot along if you're a number 1, number 2, or number 3 seed. Like, if the Heat get anywhere between that 6 through 8, and you got to face a Miami, you got to face a New York, or you got to face a Cleveland, or you got to face a Orlando. Shoot, if you got to face Atlanta, like, I think Miami, and against against all 4 of those teams, I think all 4 of those series go at least 6 games. I'm not going to lie to you. Just going off of what I've seen from the Miami Heat so far. But that has been another edition of the Routine Jumper Podcast. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily NBA content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, as I mentioned before. We are going to be doing a lot of different content here on the page. I tried to just start out by being consistent with just record the pod. But as we go along, we're going to be reacting to games. We're going to be reacting to articles. We're going to be reacting to other NBA YouTubers and other NBA conversations on mainstream media like ESPN, Fox Sports, and all those other things. So there's going to be a lot of content here on the YouTube platform besides just the podcast itself. But remember, tune into the podcast every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m., regular basis. This podcast is going to be here covering your favorite team, not just the best teams in the league, not just the teams that everybody on ESPN and Fox Sports are talking about. We cover all 30 teams in the NBA over here at Routine Jumper. So stay tuned for every single episode. But until next time when I see you guys, peace.